I don't think you should go after nobody. Shouldn't go after a manager. You shouldn't go after an agent. You want them to come after you, or you want them to be hot for you, because again, that sets the tone of the relationship. Mm-hmm. When we go after managers and agents, I just think it sets a tone of like who actually is the leader of this team. Child, we did it.
Woo, woo.
Woo, we're here. We are here with a whole podcast. A whole podcast. Not half a podcast. A whole podcast.
That's right. 100.
Welcome to the Creative Cut Up Podcast, a lively and honest space for storytellers that sits at the intersection of craft, business, and independence. I'm Felicia Pride, a writer, director, producer, head honey and honey child, and head storyteller of the Create Daily, a platform I founded in 2012 to help storytellers, especially those of us who are historically excluded, thrive creatively and professionally. And I'm here with my co-host because we got some cutting up to do.
We sure do. I'm Dria Rowland, the creative executive at Honey Child and a writer and producer.
Yes, she is.
And I'm Georgette Pierre, a voice actor and producer. You can hear it, right?
Oh, we hear that voice, honey. We hear the voice. So join us weekly where we talk shop and smack and share the good, the bad, and the ugly. And from 3 different perspectives, which I love, providing tangible tips to support your creative practice, your career, and your artist self. Because we all know that being an artist is hard as hell.
Oof, say that.
But the Creative Cut Up is here to help. Shall we begin, ladies?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, Georgette, you had an interesting experience.
I know there's always this conversation around like, how do you get representation? Georgette, you're doing all these things with voice acting. And I tell people, I was like, there's no direct path.
Well, first of all, let's start back. Talk about all the things you do in voice acting, honey.
Oh, yeah.
Let the people know.
Oh, man. Real humble with it. We
don't do that over here. We don't do humble.
No humble brag.
That over here. No.
Yeah,
I just brag with your chest.
Just brag. We don't do humbly.
I had landed my first commercial back in 2022. So that was amazing. I landed my first experience with getting my agent. I had gotten a video game, NBA 2K21.
What?
And so that had started.
Oh, you're doing too much hiding. You're doing too much hiding. We don't do that. We don't do that.
Who knew?
I know.
No, but this is real talk, Georgette, because we need to know what you're doing. There are opportunities. People will be asking us for, do you know any voice actors? We need to know what you're doing. The world needs to know what you're doing.
No, you're right. And I think there's something to be said around like, because it's happened already, like, I don't think anything of it. I'm like, well, you're only as good as your last thing, right? And so sometimes I get real in my head around like, well, my last thing hasn't been in a while. So,
well, first of all, that ain't true. You always good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's the thing that they want us, a lot of pressure to always be doing the next thing.
Yeah.
Versus actually sitting with the thing we just did and promoting the shit out of the thing we just did. And making that part of, our individual greatness.
Yeah.
Like we're great already. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with the voice acting experiences and the things that I've been landing, a lot of people keep asking me about representation and get repped. And I'm like,
as they should.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do I get in?
I know. Listen,
I already asked.
And it's funny.
I took notes.
It's funny because there's no direct path to getting repped. And what I had told people, I was like, I took some voiceover classes in New York right before the pandemic. And then there was this showcase in front of 6 different agents. And only one of them got back to me when I emailed them everything. And the one that got back to me literally started sending me auditions. And I was confused because I was like, oh, does that mean I'm repped? Like, what does this mean? But I don't have a contract. And they were basically just kind of, seeing how viable I was before they sent a contract. And they only sent the contract when I got my first booking. So it was an interesting experience. And I guess a great segue about representation and what that looks like, what that means, how to get representation, and what does it mean to have representation? Because I think people always think the grass is greener on the other side. And so I would love to dive into that a little bit more. I know, because I know, Felicia, you know, all the reps and things. And so, you know, me having a voiceover talent agent is great. I know there's people that want to know how to land other types of agents.
And really talk about building your team. Yeah. Because you could see the differences in people's teams, honey. Okay. You look at their career and you're like, how and what? They have an amazing team. You look at their career and you're like, their team does not care about them. Like, you can tell the difference with the team. So building your team and having a great team behind you is really, really important. So I'm glad we're diving into that. Where do we even begin? Where do we want to start?
What does it even mean to have a great team, right? I think a lot of people get very anxious around just wanting something.
Well, I can kind of start with, I had a similar experience to you, Georgette. I started out, I was hip-pocketed with my first agent. I did not know what was happening. They were sending me out on meetings and whatnot, but cagey about whether or not I was actually signed and a part of the agency. And luckily, one of the meetings that I went on led to me selling my first pilot. And that is what got me officially signed. The challenge I have with hip pocketing is, one, it's very controversial, right? People, it's moral, grayness. Luckily, it worked out for me. But I also think, though, the downside is that it can set the tone for the relationship. And I think when you think about teams, you want teams who are really want to be on your team, right? And don't feel like they're doing you a favor. And that you have a rapport with them in a way that you are the leader of this team. And for me, being hip-pocketed did not lend itself for me to be a leader of this team. It was hard to steer the ship back in the other direction. So I think one of the big things about a team is, one, you want people who really, really dig you as a person and dig your talent. And they want to work for you because of those things, right? I think that's the baseline. And then you want people who are really good at their job. That sounds obvious, but there are a lot of people who are not good at their jobs. Yeah. So you want people who are really good at their jobs. And then we can go into more particulars about that. But I would say those are the first two things. So for me, I was hip-pocketed.
But a quick question.
Yeah.
Because you both had a similar experience. Like you said that the agent sent you out on stuff before they signed you. But then from those meetings, you did actually get an opportunity. So does that present in gray areas? Like, do you owe them money from the opportunity because you weren't?
Oh, yes. You absolutely do. Oh, you absolutely owe them money. They actually absolutely will be taking their 10%.
Absolutely.
I'm glad I
asked. Yes. Because in their mind, they brought the opportunity to you. So they feel that, entitled to it.
Yeah. I should ask an agent this at a certain point, because you don't know, though, what's happening internally. And I think that's the other thing, is that I feel like I was never really brought into the conversation internally once I was signed, right? Because hip pocketing is kind of like on the low. You know what I mean? It's like I'm doing these things, but I'm not necessarily like part of the larger conversations that's happening in the agency, because in these agencies, they're having meetings all the time about their roster and who they should put up for certain projects and who might be good to partner with what other client and that sort of thing. So if you're not part of those conversations, you don't have a lot of exposure internally in the agency. So I think that was also a challenge in making the transition from being hip-pocketed to officially signed. So for me, though, what really made the difference in my career was once I got my manager on board. And I should say that in terms of people are always like, how do you get agents in? So my initial being hip-pocketed came through a referral. That's my number one way I tell people to get agents, is referral. So a friend of mine, actually, she wasn't even a friend. She was someone I went to drinks with. We really hit it off. And she was like, oh, my friend is looking for clients. I'll send your materials to them. And no one ever does that in Hollywood. First of all, they may say that, but they ain't going to do it. She had not read me. This was very risky on her part. She's my good friend. I need to be like, girl, what was you thinking? My samples could have been trash, but she sends my materials. And I had some heat going for me already, because I think I had already sold Really Love. So I had heat because we sold that without agents. So I had some heat that helped, but still clearly not enough to be officially signed, right? So once he read my materials, then he had a meeting with him, and I started to be hip pocketed. So referrals is that way. Same way I got my manager. When I was finally ready for a manager, I told everybody I was looking for a manager. I remember going to like the NBC Writers on the Verge alumni meeting, and one of the alumni was like, "What do you need?" I was like, "I need a manager." He was like, "Send me your stuff." I sent him his stuff. He sent to his manager. He was like, "Yeah." My manager was like, "You're not for him, but it's all good." And I was like, "All right, thanks," but I'm glad he sent it. But then I sent it to my homeboy, who was like my brother. But again, relationships are important. So I wanted to make sure I was ready before I asked him to do this favor for me. And I was ready. My samples were ready. And he sent my material to his manager, and I ended up signing with his manager, and we've been together for several years, probably like six or 7 years now. And she is my ride or die. And I always liken the agent manager position very, very crudely as agent being daddy and manager being mommy, and agent being muscle and precedent. And we could talk a little bit more about that. And then manager being like day to day, checking in, helping you craft the long-term strategy for your career, knowing the ins and outs of everything. That's how I look at manager. And then I eventually got a lawyer, and I've transitioned lawyers, and now I have an amazing Black woman lawyer. Shout out to Marcy Cleary, and shout out to my manager, Diane Frazier at Industry. Marcy's amazing. I will say, for me, if you had to start somewhere, it would be with a lawyer, to be honest. Like, you need somebody to negotiate these contracts and get this money for you. But I also think a manager who is a great manager can change your career as well.
I've definitely heard about the lawyer first, because lawyers could actually operate as temporary representation for you as well.
Yes.
So that
they can submit you to stuff. Yeah.
So with the manager piece, though, has that evolution looked like for you from when you started off with the first agency that you were with to now? And why is it so crucial sometimes for people to maybe shifting focus from having an agent first and maybe going after a manager first? Because can't managers also look for talent agencies that are in your best interest for you as well?
I'm at a new agency, so I'm at UTA right now. And I'll just say also, I got that through referral. So most of my writers group was at UTA, and I was like the odd woman out. And I remember we had to fire our agents. And then I was on Grey's Anatomy, and our number 2 in the room at the time was like, UTA had signed the agreement to sign the WGA agreement. And she was like, well, if anybody wants a introduction to UTA, I threw my hand up so fast. I was like, woohoo, right here, me, hello. So she introduced me. And then I had 2 other members of my writers group talk me up as I was being submitted into UTA. And I say that because you said going after managers. I don't think you should go after nobody. Shouldn't go after a manager. You shouldn't go after an agent. You want them to come after you, or you want them to be hot for you, because again, that sets the tone of the relationship. Mm-hmm. When we go after managers and agents, I just think it sets a tone of like who actually is the leader of this team. So UTA was even a referral. Now I was proactive about getting into UTA, but I had those referrals that were like, oh, she's got some heat on her. So that helped tremendously. In terms of your question about managers, my manager and I meet every week. We meet every Tuesday. We've been meeting every week for several years now. And I think that we just have I don't know if our relationship has changed so much. I think we always had a great rapport. I think we are also clear on like what our roles are. So I don't know if it's changed that much, but we definitely stay in close contact, close communication. She's the first point of contact. I call her after most meetings. I let her in on things. She's also the person I vent to. So again, shout out to Diane Frazier, because she's the first one that'll hear like how I'm feeling, and she listens and she continues to fight the good fight. But I don't know if my relationship has changed so much with her. I think it's the agents that, you always kind of want to be strategic about how you work with them, for sure. Acting on your ideas is a form of self-love. And when I decided to write the Creative Comeback Workbook and Journal, it was with you in mind. Storytellers with stories inside of you that you need to get out into the world. But life, fear, uncertainty has a way of leaving us stuck. But no more. It's time to reclaim our creative practice and get unstuck. The Creative Comeback Workbook and Journal can help you get back on creative track. 30 days of dynamic prompts, exercises to stimulate creativity, alongside motivational quotes, journal pages, and more. If you're ready to create again, get your copy of the Creative Comeback Workbook and Journal today at creativecomeback.com. That's creativecomeback.com. Because it's never too late to become the artist you always wanted to be.
I want to come at it from a different angle, but I promise it's related. So my past life is journalism. And, a lot of times I would reach out to certain talent to try to cover them in the publications I worked for, arrange interviews, and their teams would gatekeep. Their teams, a lot of times cherry pick who the magazines they talk to, the outlets they talk to, right? And so you get like something happening recently with Lenny Kravitz saying he wished that the Black media had embraced him more. But a lot of times the Black media probably did, but your agent was in the way. So I think it's really important what you're saying to make sure your agent understands your vision, the opportunities you want, and that they're not making decisions that are actually hindering you or keeping you from certain opportunities because they don't think it's aligned.
That gatekeeping happens. Ask any indie filmmaker, like they're sending their scripts to talent and talent aren't getting the scripts, right? And so I think a couple of things. One, some of that is a little bit out of your control because you actually may not know that your team is gatekeeping. I've asked my team to send me everything that is submitted to them for me to review. I don't care how ridiculous it is, how out of alignment it is. I still want to see it. So that is something that I think is important. But again, you can't control that because you can ask for that. Are you going to get that? I don't know. I also think that's why it's important for us to establish our own relationships. So one thing I always think is interesting is the gatekeeping that happens with information, right? So for instance, in the business, you're going to a general meeting with a production exec and you're not giving their email address, like, 'cause it's all set up through your team. So you don't know their email address. Yeah. So I'm always the one where I ask my manager, I'm like, can I get their email address afterwards? And they happily send it to me and I start to establish my own relationship. Right. So I think we have to make sure that we are in charge of establishing our own relationships so that when we do want certain opportunities or we are trying to go after certain things, we can do that. And that includes with talent. Those things are important. There is a lot of gatekeeping around information.
You make an interesting point, and I would love to have the conversation around like when you have someone on your team that is no longer aligned with your vision and really, one, how are you navigating removing them from your team? And then how are you really managing the relationship with your agent? Because I know when I came in, I didn't know what the talent agent relationship was supposed to look like. And so when I would observe it in others, I was like, wow.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point, though. I think it's also important to be in community with other folks that do what you do. I'm in these writers groups and we're able to ask each other questions like, my agent just did this. Does this make sense? My lawyer said this. Does this make sense? It's important because, again, the gatekeeping of information. So by talking more to your peers, I think it's really important. You start to figure out, so-and-so at CAA did this. Why aren't we doing, like, you can start to be like, this is happening. I know what's happening. So it's a very important part to be talking to our peers for sure. I believe in fire fast. I'm not going to lie, especially when it comes to your team, because we talk about your livelihood, right? I find it's very interesting, the relationship between artists and agents. It's like we are scared of them. It's like literally our parents, like, we don't want to disappoint them. We're going to hold on even though they treat us poorly. Like, it's a weird thing that I see that happens where we lose a lot of our agency and power in dealing with our team. And I don't understand that because we pay them. Do you know what I mean? I just don't understand that. I don't get it. So I do think, though, you have to set the strategy. You have to set the tone for the relationship. You have to make sure that everybody understands what you're going for, what you're trying to do. And you also have to do your part. You have to do the work, You have to deliver, you have to show up and all that. When you do those things, if members of your team are not showing up in the way that you need to, it's important to have a conversation about that. But then also it's important to make a decision if you want to keep them on your team, because you could be losing money on a near daily basis the longer you keep them. That's how I feel. So I had a period of time I call it the red wedding, where I had to let go of 2 feature agents and a lawyer. And it's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to do that. And then, of course, sometimes people are in their feelings about it. But I'm like, wait a minute. So y'all expect writers to feel rejection every day, all day long? And then you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And then you still have an attitude about it. Like, it's weird. But I think we have to do what's best for us. If we think about, as just like these corporations, think about what's best for the company. In order for the long-term health of the company, we have to lay off 500 people. In order for the long-term health of Felicia Inc., this is what has to happen. And I think a lot more of us have to be thinking in that way.
Do you wait till you have something else lined up, or you just...
People always ask me for advice about their reps. They should not ask me for advice about the reps, because I'm usually going to say, let them go. But you have to have, if not something set up, you have to understand what the alternative is. Right. And that's all with everything. Like, even when I first got into the business, people were like, you should be an assistant. I knew that wasn't the path for me. I had to have an alternative. Right. Well, if that's not going to be the path I'm going to go down, what's my alternative? And I feel the same way about reps. It's like, what's the alternative? So that I definitely thought about that before having to let them go, for sure. I do think that people should have something else set up if they feel like they need something else, for sure. But that's also tricky, like having to try to date other reps while you're getting rid of your other reps. It's tricky.
There's contractual stuff in there too for a time.
There's no contractual stuff, honey.
Oh, so in my contract, there's like a contractual time frame of overlap, right? And
that's so interesting. That's the other thing about this business. I've never signed a contract with an agent or a manager.
Oh, really?
Nope.
Interesting.
Never have signed anything written. Never. I don't know. I think that's just the nature of the business. I mean, if you think about it, not a lot of contracts are signed until you sell something. Like, you working on this project together. There's no contract. Y'all just working together, taking out pitches. Because, it's supposed to be a handshake type of industry, even though that's far from the truth. But I haven't signed anything with. And I also, I'm always tell people, I also do not have my checks sent to my agency. I get my checks delivered to me, and then I pay out commissions.
Can we talk about that, please? Can we please talk about that?
The lean in.
Well, because listen, I had to lean into that.
Georgette want to know.
Because when I first heard someone else talk about that, I was like, wait, how? And as ignorant and naive as that sounded, I didn't think that was possible. And he was like, why am I waiting 3 months for my money when they work for me? And so I would love to understand, Felicia, how you set up that dynamic, or I'm sure these are conversations that are upfront in the beginning before the relationship, flourishes or begins.
Yeah. I mean, I actually did it midway at one point too. I was like, y'all can't handle my money anymore because I get it too late. I remember at one point, I think one of the decisions, I think it was around Christmas, and the office closed. So they were like, oh, you're not going to get your money until the new year. And I said, oh, no, because we're not going to be able to process it. Nobody's going to be here to process it. And I said, oh, no. I remember one time going to, I'm not crazy. I know all the accountants. I usually know all the accountants at studios in terms of when I'm on a staff. I know the accountants. I have their direct email if something is funky with my money. And at one point, I actually went to the Warner Brothers lot, and they cut a check for me right then and there, because I was like, and that was when I was getting checks delivered to my agency. I was like, no, I need my money before I go on holiday. I know they may not need the money. I need my money. So that was one of the things I was like, too slow, too many lost checks, too many things that are happening. And then another thing is, I remember reading somewhere where Sean Ryan talked about that he got his checks delivered straight to him because it just set a tone for the relationship of who's paying who. And when you're receiving money from your agents, I do think that it can set a tone of who's paying who. right? So if I'm paying you the commissions, it definitely can help set a different tone. But also, I just don't like my money going to someplace else. What?
Man, listen.
That's weird.
Like, make it make sense. Oh, and you're making money off my interest? Like, no, thank you.
It started getting ridiculous, like 60 days sometimes. And I'm just like, I got rent to pay, right?
Yeah, and it may be, and to be honest, like, it's not a big deal. Like, there may be some like, are you sure you want to do this? And I'm like, yes. And then end the story. Like, it's not brought up again. It doesn't impact the relationship.
Right.
And I pay out once a month. So yes, it wasn't a big deal as people would think it would be, to like, oh my God, how did you broach the topic? Like, I said that I want my checks coming to me. Like, it's that simple.
But I'm glad you said that. I think that's such a central part of this podcast, and what we want creators to take away is feeling empowered and, not being afraid to make those decisions and advocate for yourself and be in charge of your career in that way.
I got some advocating to do, Dria, this year. Okay, we got some advocating.
And the thing is, I'm fine with paying my commissions when I feel like I am being supported. You know what I mean? Like, this, Diane, you get this money. You're working hard for me, right? So I don't have a problem with paying those commissions. But then when you start to be like, but wait a minute, are they really working for me? And then you start to do the math and do the numbers and do that 10%. That's when you start to really want to evaluate the relationship, for sure. And then, you'll have colleagues still waiting on checks. And I'm like, oh, I got mine FedEx to me yesterday. So
like that part.
Some of these checks, honey, are sitting on desks in agencies, just sitting.
Oh man. It's so wild. It is, because all they're doing is cashing it, reissuing a new check in your name after they take their percentage out. And I'm like, I could give you that check.
Which is also extra work. So it begs the question of why.
Yeah, I think coming from journalism, freelance, where you might get net 60, net 90, or chase these companies down for your money, that's to be expected. But I don't think people would know that is also the process, after you're signed to an agency, that you can still deal with some of those things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially on the studio side. And that's why you also want, reps who will fight for you, because the studios will be very slow with your money. So you want reps who are going to fight to make sure you get your money. And also your guild, our WGA fights for our money as well. So just to give you a sense of who's on my team, I have 2 TV lit agents. I have 2 feature agents, both on both my TV agent side and my feature agent side. I have one who's a partner, and then I have my manager, and then I have a lawyer. So that's the team.
Can you break down the difference between the types of agents, right? Like, what is the TV lit agent? What is the feature agent? And why do you have, 2 in both of those categories as well?
Yeah, usually when you have 2 agents, you have what they call a day-to-day. That's like your main point of contact. And then usually if you have a partner agent, that's for like things that need to be higher level things that need to be escalated. They are part of bigger strategy conversations. So that's usually why you have 2 agents. TV just deals with TV. Features just deals with features. I think one thing for me is wanting to kind of break down the silos a little bit between my team, my TV and feature, or really just wanting everyone to know everything that's going on. Because there could be some synergy. Like the business always likes to say, TV and film are silos, but I know that I got a staffing opportunity because of a feature I worked on within that same production company. So they do have opportunities. So I just want everybody to kind of know what's happening. So that has been also helpful, and something that I want to do more of is make sure everyone is in the loop of all the projects that I have going on.
Do they also bring in not just writing opportunities because they know your plan and your strategy? Is their goal also tasked to make sure they're bringing in some of those other things that you want to expand into as well?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely talk about that, me and my manager, but I think that's something that I want to do more of, is have more exposure within my agency for sure. We've been taking more meetings with the unscripted department, and we took a meeting with the podcast department, but there's so many departments in UTA. So definitely getting more exposure in the agency is a goal of mine for sure. Yeah. To help build Honey Child, right? To help also take advantage of the immense resources, everything from talent to, brands they work with, taking advantage of those resources for sure.
And we talked about the main members, like your lawyer agent manager, but are there other people who have been helpful on your team? Maybe they're not like full-time, but people who have plugged in some gaps or help you in other additive ways. So
my hairdresser.
Like shout out to the hairdresser.
Nina definitely was on my team. But yes, definitely publicists. You know, I've had a publicist for a long time because I came from a different career and I also had a career as an author. So I understand when you have a good publicist and you understand publicity, having a publicist can be really, really helpful. So shout out to Jasu Sims, who has been our publicist for a year. I've been working with Jasu probably now over 10 years, off and on, but over 10 years. So she's definitely on the team. I also work with a story editor. Shout out to Ruth. So it's interesting because I do come from journalism. And, you know, as journalists, we had editors. We had people who really brought out the best in our work and asked us the right questions. I remember my first editor at the Baltimore City paper, Brett McCabe, who just knew the right questions to ask to make the piece better. So, and I actually want to have Ruth on the podcast to talk about the writer story editor relationship because it's not as prevalent as in the US. It's more prevalent in the UK. Like Michaela Cole talked about her story editor that she worked with on I May Destroy You, and in Canada. But here it's interesting. I think that writers deserve editors. And when you have a great editor, they just bring out the best in your work. And this is not an editor like a line editor. I'm talking about like a publishing editor who will read your manuscript and write you a 2-page, 3-page, 5-page letter about it that provides feedback. That's what I mean by a story editor. So Ruth is definitely on the team. I did have a business manager at a point in time, but I don't think I was ready for one. One, it's a lot of letting go of control over my money. And I have some stuff I had to work out around that. But I'm like, I don't really like this. I'm not ready for this just yet. And also, I think you have to have a certain kind of volume, at least in my opinion, to justify the 5%, because they'll take 5% too. So if you think about it, and we can do the math right now, so my agents take 10%, my manager takes 10%, and my lawyer takes 5%. That's 25%. I also stock away 25 to 30% of each check for taxes. So what does that leave us with? 50%. To live off of, right? So those percentages add up. So I was like, 30% going out the door to team. I don't know if I need that right now. So I may come to a point where I want a business manager again, but I just wasn't, it wasn't a good fit and it wasn't the right time for sure. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the business manager was more so overall the things that you wanted to accomplish in your business.
No, business manager is more financial. So what they do is they pay out all your commissions, but they also get your checks. So that's another thing. I was like, we could do this, but I still get my checks, but they'll pay out your commissions. They do your taxes. They can help with large purchases, cars, homes. They handle all your state requirements. So I have now a bookkeeper. So that I should say is another person on my team. I have a bookkeeper that manages, does my financials each month and then prepares the stuff that I need to go to my accountant. And my accountant is really just for tax and retirement planning purposes. That's it. But the bookkeeper keeps everything together so that because I have been in a situation where the taxes was backing up. You know what I mean? So now I'm like, it's very important for me to keep all that clean. People always want to know the top ways. I mentioned referrals. And I think the second way is heat. Like having heat on you, whether that's because you made something that, got heat on it. You have a sizable audience because you've been, making and catering to that audience. Whatever the case is, heat goes a long way. Because again, I am a proponent of of agents reps coming after you not querying managers' agents. I just don't think, I know that people can, first of all, you can't really query agents. It doesn't really work. You can more so query managers, but even then, I don't recommend it.
It's interesting because I feel like the landscape has changed a lot. I remember when I attempted to query years ago when I first moved to New York, and I was like, well, what do I really have to get an agent, right? Like, oh, I've done this, I've done that. When I look back on it, I didn't have shit to really bring the attention of why someone should want to represent me during that time.
I mean, I think that's a good question. At what point should I be thinking about representation? But I think it's about when you first have the material that's ready, right? You have your portfolio of work that you can show that is ready and prime time ready. And when I say ready for prime time, I mean ready for someone to hire you based off reading or reviewing it. Prime time ready. When you have those materials ready and you've done the work around sort of building relationships and networking that could lead to something. I think what happens is that, sometimes agents and managers don't want to break talent, right? They want someone who is already on the rise or already have something going on. So I think for you, it's like, how have I nurtured my relationships that could actually lead to something? And then sometimes I'm like, if you can get that first job without a manager or agent, go for it. And then that's a great time to get a manager or agent to help you get the second job.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's hard to get the first job without manager or agent. So it's about finding those people, those reps who, because you have heat or because you have referrals, who are interested in want to take the time to build however long it's going to take to build you. But also you have to put in the work. So that is like the hustle of setting up meetings, if that's what it takes, making sure your material is ready. Maybe it's writing new stuff. Maybe it's making something. It's something that'll give them something to do.
I like that. I think it's helpful for people to pull the wool from over people's eyes, because a lot of times people just don't know. They're going off of what they're told, but it's a lot of times not from people that have actually gotten the representation, or the results didn't net out what they thought it was going to be. Yeah.
And it's funny because I see some OG writers who only have a lawyer. And they just work consistently because of the relationships that they've built. So there's many ways to do it. I think there's a certain point in time, particularly if you want to work directly in Hollywood, that you will need reps. But then I think there's a certain point in time that your team may not have to be as big as you think it needs to be. So how are you feeling, Georgette, about your representation journey?
I got some things to write down. I told myself this was the year to really get clear about my business, right? Like the things that I want to do. I got some things to think about, and how I like the relationships I want to have moving forward with others that I have given so much power to. It's like, Georgette, no, how do you want to interact with them, and what do you need in this relationship? And making sure that I'm thinking about that.
I think that's the thing. People are like, what do agents do? And I think that it's important, to have tempered expectations about what they do. And, one big thing is to help you find jobs, right? That's a huge thing. So that's something that you can be in conversation with them about in terms of how well they're doing that. But you also have to make sure you're giving them what they need to help you find a job. Also, setting up meetings for you that are strategic to advance your career, helping along with negotiation. So kind of being a lockstep with your lawyer and using their muscle around precedent. That's my big thing for agencies. They know what precedent has been set because of other clients, right? So they'll be like, well, we know at so-and-so streamer, this client got that precedent has been set. So we're going to try to get that for you. That can be actually very valuable. So those are kind of like the main things: jobs, meetings, some, help with career strategy and really trying to position you, and also acting as sort of a liaison between you and producers and execs, right? Often producers and execs will talk to your reps before they talk to you. So they act as a liaison between them. And they do many other things, but I would say those are the main things to be thinking about. I think sometimes we want our reps to save us, and that's not going to happen. But I also think that we have to make sure that if we have made the vision plain and we have done the work, that our reps are meeting us from what they're supposed to be doing.
And I will say, on my end as a creative executive, what you just said right there about your reps, being that liaison is huge. That's the advice I got recently. If you want to be good at this, you need to meet as many agents and managers as possible so that they're feeding you the talent first and helping you to develop those relationships. So yes, what you just said was huge. But do y'all think, honestly, that this is one of the antiquated parts of the business, that you have this agent who's the middleman? I had a situation where an actress reached out to me directly on Twitter. We set up a meeting, and then I got in trouble because they were like, oh, you should have went through her team. And I'm like, why we got to go backwards to go through that step when we could just coordinate with each other? So I wonder, speaking candidly, is this one of the antiquated parts of the business, or is this just something that,
yes,
it is what it is?
I think it's antiquated in terms of sometimes I feel like artists are coddled like we're treated kind of like children, like we can't speak on our own behalf. And I think there's something to be said about needing help running your business, right? I need help running my business. I think sometimes the way that this business is set up, though, is like, it's not necessarily about help running your business. It's like, let me be another gatekeeper around this business because I have information you don't. I have relationships you don't. So that piece feels very antiquated to me. I'm just like, why do we have to talk through so many different people? And by the time it gets to me, is this what was even said? I just don't like that piece of things. I think that's very antiquated. I think it's very inefficient. So yes, I think the unwritten rules of like, you're supposed to go through this and go through that is weird to me because again, we're all people who did not grow up in this particular business. Right. These are rules that are not stated anywhere. There's no code of conduct. You're just supposed to know, especially when the rule doesn't make sense. You're like, but why don't we just talk direct? I think that there's a lot of work that could be done around reevaluating that relationship and making it work for everybody and making it more efficient so that we can all get more money. And be able to make more things.
At the end of the day.
And be able to make more things and make more impact. I think we waste a lot of time. A lot of time is wasted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amen.
Okay. Ashe.
Well, we could probably have a whole nother episode about the specifics and getting into which we may, about working with your team and building your team and all of that good stuff. But
because people will probably have questions about this episode. I expect some follow-up questions.
Yeah. Yes. And we can get into all of that. But the one thing I would just say is, as you mentioned, Dria, I just want us to have more agency in our own careers and not be afraid and really make sure that we are trying to sustain our own self. I think that's important. So, yeah. So shall we get into how we create? Georgette, do you want to explain what that is?
How we create is a segment where we share all forms of inspiration that may have stopped us in our tracks, made us laugh, had us shouting, or even reminded us to rest. How are you creating this week, Dria? Anything
that's a great question. I have been reading the book Atomic Habits.
Yes.
It's so interesting. I've heard this phrase ever since I started reading this book. Discipline is freedom, or find the freedom in discipline. And so those things sound counteractive, but when you get your routines together, when you get those healthy habits and you can kind of automate some areas of your life so that you can direct energy to things that deserve more of your capacity. You know what I mean? So there is freedom in discipline and in creating strong and healthy habits. So that book has been really helping me, especially, something great for the top of the year to really think about my systems and how efficient I'm being and how I can carry that forth throughout the year.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Something that has popped up for me that continues to pop up, and that's a meditation podcast. Tara Brach discovered this woman, or was introduced to this woman's podcast years ago, and she's been in the game for over 30, 40 years. So I'll stretch listening to her, and sometimes a creative inspo just kind of jets out when you're not thinking about things. And so she definitely helps me unplug or kind of get to the root of something that may be stuck and I'm just not able to kind of get it out.
Well, I started watching the new season of True Detective that was created by Issa Lopez, and I am digging it. Issa is a writer-director. And you can tell like that both of those skills are equally weighted because I think it's really well directed, but it's also like has story and is plotted well. It's been inspiring from a directorial standpoint, but just also from a TV writing standpoint.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you again next week. Thanks for listening to the Creative Cut Up Podcast, a lively and honest space for storytellers that sits at the intersection of craft, business, and independence. Listen to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you dig it, subscribe, rate, review, and please tell a friend. If you need help getting back into your creative practice, check out the Creative Comeback Workbook and Journal. You can also join our newsletter and our We Create Daily community, both of which provide even more resources and opportunities to thrive creatively at thecreatedaily.com. And lastly, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at The Create Daily. Creating is hard as hell, but community can make all the difference. Join We Create Daily, our community of storytellers of all kinds who, like you, are looking to advance their craft, careers, and creativity. Join our membership community today at thecreatedaily.com. That's thecreatedaily.com. And make your creative journey a little easier alongside like-minded storytellers just like you.